Okay, turning it on and off again, IT crowd solution. So I'll do the introduction while the computer is rebooting. It's actually working on Windows updates, it's even better. So, well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about who we are and the challenges that we see when scaling your game to massive proportions. So in the next 10 to 15 minutes, yeah, it's now updating, let's give it a few minutes. Slight less is fine. So in the next 10 to 15 minutes, I'll go a little bit about who we are, where we came from, and the challenges that we and our customers face when scaling up. And there might be some things that, while you're developing a game, that might seem far away and that you don't really think about yet, but I have some advice, some lessons, explaining to you with examples why you should think about this before releasing your game, and not after your game is live, because then it's usually too late. So, quick 5 minutes, who we are. We are founded in 2002. In 2004, we started with, as told earlier, with consumer game hosting. Once the laptop is finished booting up, there's a pretty picture of me back in those days. And games now, back then, Unreal Tournament, 99, first Counter-Strike, first Half-Lives. When you looked at the online ecosystem, back then, the company would develop the game, it would release the game server, and just hope that the community would do something with it, put resources, their own servers online, and the game developer would basically work on the next game, or the next expansion. Nowadays, of course, completely different, where every game has a live component. The goal of every game is to be the next Fortnite, the next PUBG, or the next Rainbow Six, where you can earn the majority of your game's revenue, not from actual selling the game, but from the next 5 to 10 years of maintaining your game with many microtransactions, updates, and so forth. So the major milestones for us in around 2007, 2008, we started working with a company called EA. I guess some of you might have heard from them. And that's when also the Xbox 360s came out, so there was actually internet access on your console. And that's when companies like EA and others started to take control of their game after it was released, about the online portion. So they started restricting who could provide the online part of their game, to ensure that the quality is always the same, that they have full ownership of it, and that they're able to earn the revenue that they planned for it. Okay, so now we give this another try. Dit is de right HDMI, toch?
Ik kreeg hem net heel even binnen wel.
Ja.
Als het goed is.
Of is het connector gewoon graag? Hey, kijk. So, we can skip ahead. Told this, explained this. So, what are the main things I want to give you as takeaway after these, 10 minutes? There's always a conflict between developer convenience and the ultimate cost per concurrent user of your game. There's a lot of decisions to be made during your development about authority, integrations and lock-in, and especially player experience is crucial if you want your game to survive after it's launched. So, overview, we skipped this, apologies. Here's the picture, I promised, it was me, a long time ago. And back to the history, as the introducer explained, in 2018 we got acquired by Ubisoft. We're still an independent company within the Ubisoft group, serving many, many customers and competitors of a mother company, which is an interesting position to be in. To you, many familiar games, the Battlefields, the FIFAs, the Rocket Leagues of this world, is the kind of games that we provide the infrastructure for. And I guess if you ever use Discord, video, voice, all of that is going through this little small company based in Rotterdam, or technically Capelle aan de IJssel, but as someone from Rotterdam, you kind of want to ignore that part. Quickly moving ahead to the content, talking about developer convenience. So as I explained earlier, the norm of today's games is to be a live service game, where the goal of the developer is to earn revenue from the game through expansions, transactions, booster packs, etc., after the game is officially out of the door. Obviously, this takes all place online, takes of money. In fact, generally you look at what are my overall costs of my game. It's actually going to be generally going to be your hosting costs, and you will calculate that down to how much does a player cost me when he plays my game during an X amount of time. Usually they think, okay, cost per month per player or cost per session. Generally, you will start seeing these kind of metrics on the producer's table to decide how I'm going to earn money, how I'm going to make my game profitable, how I'm going to get this nice bonus, maybe in some of the game studios, after all those many, many years of work. So one of the key things you need to decide about very, very early is client versus server authority, because it has major, major impacts on the costs once your game is out of the door. And also early design decisions have big consequences. If you say, okay, there was one customer we worked with, they wanted to have multiple terabytes of map data be server authoritative about where the person was, meaning that all the server instances would have needed multiple terabytes of storage solutions, central storage solutions, in all the different locations around the world. Fortunately, they were talking to us 3-4 years before the game was supposed to come out, and we told them, we would love to serve you, but your game is going to be unprofitable. It's not going to happen. And so this is like a slippery slope on this topic. The easiest, most convenient way as a developer is just have everything client authoritative. So you don't have to think too much about this server kind of stuff. It's also cheaper, usually, easier. But it becomes a problem in the multiplayer games when people start doing things with the client that you should not want, like changing the amount of resources, duping your items, killing players without you knowing. It's a slippery slope, but that's not even the most important one. It's also when you have to have multiple people play together. Commonly, back in the days, it always was peer-to-peer. So you would have like 4 or 5 people playing together, and one of those 5 people would be randomly the host. And as you all might have experienced back in the days, it was also a problem connecting to each other. And in today's world, with IPv6, carrier grade net, it's an utmost nightmare. And my kind of law in this case, if you want to connect more than 4 people together using peer-to-peer, it's always going to fail with at least with one person. So then we come to the smallest example of a server authoritative game server, which is nothing more than a net puncher. It's a game server running in a data center, for example, taking all the clients to a central location, ensuring that all the clients can talk to a game server in the data center, and then send the data back and forth. That's the most simplest form, but it doesn't do any authority yet. When you look, for example, at the Battle Royale games like PUBG or Fortnite, there's a lot of authority on the server side, where the server decision-making is always leading and the client has to follow. It's important when there's skills involved, there might be money involved, there might be item stores involved, asset stores. But on the downside, the size of their game builds and the amount of cores and RAM they need per game session, also per player, increased exponentially. I can run hundreds of net punchers on a single physical machine, and maybe only run 1 or 2 of these large kind of instances of those games that I just described. So it's a major, major impact on your cost. But you need to think about this early during your game design, where I am going to leave my authority, and do I want to? And of course, the solution is also not make everything server authoritative, because in that case, you need a lot of servers in a lot of locations because of latency. If all the decision is done by the server, from a client perspective, if they are further away than a few hundred kilometers, it's going to be a very disruptive playing experience. So it's a very difficult topic, but be aware of it. Case in point, a certain night fighting game of a mother company. It started with a peer-to-peer model. It was a disaster, a complete disaster. They rebuilt within the 2 months after launch to a simple server-side authority build, and managed to recover the game launch and kind of recover as a game and become quite successful, which is a bit of a exception to the rule, because usually when your game fails after release, it's unfortunately usually over. So, give them time, quickly moving. Talking about integration and logging. Also, any questions? I'm here the whole day, my team is here the whole day, you can just approach me. I'm not trying to sell anything, we're happy to share knowledge, just approach me. So we're talking about game servers. There's generally 3 types of game servers that I see in the world right now. One is the fire and forget model. That's when your game server, think about the old Unreal Tournament 99 examples that I talked about, where there's there's no centralized matchmaking, there's just a server browser, and the players decide themselves where they're going to end up. And it's a little bit archaic about, let's say, if you need more capacity, how do you know if everything's being full or not? Well, you would look at the total amount of player slots available for the game versus how many players are actually in them, and then try to make a scaling decision. But it's tricky, because the matches can go on forever. So when are you going to downscale resources when they're no longer needed? That's a difficult question, and it's not so optimal. So that's why we see most large games nowadays have implemented an allocation-based flow with the matchmaker. So explaining real quickly what that is. The game developer usually has a matchmaker or uses an open match or one of the other publicly available matchmakers. And when they have enough players in the game queuing for a match, that matchmaker would send to a platform orchestrator, such as us or the Unity or PlayFab or many others, a request, please give me a game server in this region. Now, our platform would take that request and provide a game server for those players to join, hopefully within a second or less, and then the game directs those players toward that server. Everyone is happy, and when the match is done, the server gets removed again to make sure that the costs are contained. Generally works well, but sometimes depending, well, if you're running on a Windows build on your backend, well, you need a lot more warm standby capacity, unless you're happy to have your players wait 5 minutes to start a game, because provisioning Windows instances, even in the cloud providers nowadays, is still it takes a lot longer than if you're running on Linux. So it's not just the licensing costs, it's also the scaling aspect of your game. I hope there are no Microsoft people here in the room, but I would never recommend running your game servers, your backends on Windows, if you care about performance or costs. I also buy a lot of Microsoft licenses, but yeah. And then there's, of course, what I start to see nowadays is container-based approaches. And here I'm not talking about monolithic game servers and you slap it in the container and you say, yes, I'm using containers. Because if you're doing that, then you're just throwing money away, because there's some overhead. And if you have simply a monolithic game server process, you might just run it directly on the VM. And you can still install your additional sidecards, applications to monitor, no problem. But let's say you're working on an innovative new game engine with multiple small processes, microservices, you need to scale up and down independently, then a container-based orchestration platform is definitely the way to go. And there's definitely some developments there and companies working on that, because then, in that case, your game server can transcend the limits of a single machine, because all these small processes can run on multiple machines together, and that, I believe, might be the key to unlocking very large interactive worlds in the future. Apologies, I'm just trying to move quick. So, what do you need to look out for, though? Coming back again to developer convenience, what the cloud parties, the hyperscalers do in these days is very, very good, very, very smart, and very, very useful for starting companies. They make it extremely easy to get some resources, to start developing your game, use all the nice tooling. But then, once your game is successful, and you've not kept it in mind, then you suddenly realize that you're locked in, and then the millions of euros invoices start coming in, and you have nowhere else to go. So definitely one thing I would like to point out here, a cloud provider is just also running in someone else's data center. It's like we had to say Waldo discussie, that was Facebook, but the Google Cloud data centers are in Groningen, Microsoft is also here in the Netherlands. And once your game starts getting successful, once you're not longer talking about tens of servers or a few hundreds of servers, but when you're talking thousands of servers, of VMs that you need, you're getting exactly the same discussions that we also had As a data center provider, they will want to ask you for commitments, yearly spends, long-term contracts, or you simply are not going to get your capacity that your game needs. So, plus you end up paying 2 to 5 times more than if you would have contracted it yourself in the data center parties. So what is my solution here? And we're just one of many companies who have something like this. So it is try to go hybrid. So try to design your application in a way that is not 100% dependent on a single cloud provider, because there's many examples, also recent examples, of a cloud provider having an outage. And what if your whole game is running there, or your whole game backend is running there? Then you're also stuck. Then you cannot go anywhere. So at least make the ability that they're not 100% dependent on a single cloud. So you can have a multi-cloud approach. And even better if you can think about at least your game service, which is just in the end simple compute. It's usually not persistent storage. We're not talking about your game backends. We're talking about your game service. Is try to go hybrid. There's flexible physical infrastructure providers where you can have the cost advantages. So when you have your normal game release, it's just like a movie. The first 2 weeks, everyone wants to play it. Okay, if it's really good, even more people want to play it. But generally, the first 2 weeks to a month, there's a big peak, and it slowly drops off. And then you have your base layer of players, and then there will be fluctuations depending on how exciting your content is, how exciting your DLCs are, and your new game interactions. So that base layer, accounting for some evening and morning shifts, of course, then you need to start thinking about your cost per concurrent user, about your income per concurrent user, and then you need to make sure that you're not locked into a single cloud provider who only lets you run it on their own cloud, but then you can have to, when you have the ability to choose, you can also negotiate with these cloud providers saying, well, if you don't give me better rates, I will just put everything on Google. If you don't give me better rates, I will put half of this on physical infrastructure, which is 50% cheaper. So for the financial success of your game, be aware of these locking options. Even though it might at the start be very convenient for your developers and decrease your time to market, and make your game development quicker. And I would definitely recommend, okay, use those free credits that they give you, because man, why wouldn't? It's smart. As long as you realize that for your release of your game, for your success of your game, you need to keep all these other options in mind to ensure that you're not stuck. Because the worst thing that happen is stuck. And a case example is there, for example, a well-known Battle Royale game from Asia, which was a success a few years ago. We had a meeting at our office in 2016 with them, just before they exploded. And they were trying to investigate if they could switch from a single cloud provider to a hybrid strategy. But then the game exploded, they had no more time. And of course, they were very successful, but the biggest winner of everything there was Amazon. And in my opinion, the money that could have been saved could have been enough to develop another few games a couple of times over. So, lessons learned from this topic: be aware that working with a single provider, you may be fully locked into the platform through the integrations, ultimately at great cost. And developer convenience is great to speed up your time to market, but ensure you're not locked in so you can go hybrid, and definitely go multi-cloud. I mean, if you say physical infrastructure is of 1999, I don't care anymore, okay, I understand, but definitely make sure you can go multi-cloud, because we've seen many customers here in real life where a single cloud strategy ended in tears. So quickly moving ahead, trying to get you some time back. What's the second most important part? Actually, what's the most important part to make your game successful? And that's having a good player experience. Of course, a producer would say, no, for me the financial objective is most important. The game needs to be profitable, but you need good player experience to keep that retention high and ensure that these players keep playing your game. So then we get to the fun part of the internet. Even on BNR today in the car, they were talking about Overwatch 2. I mean, when it's on the most boring news radio station of the Netherlands, well, nowadays, gaming has definitely gone mainstream. Back in 2004, people were looking, why aren't you in the basement? Go away. So there's a lot of attacks on gaming because it gets news. It gets clicks, it gets, as we say, e-fame. It disrupts Twitch streams, it disrupts tournaments. And you need to... I know for many in game development, this whole networking thing and the security thing and entity thing is often something, oh, that's so far away from me, I don't know it, it's not comfortable, we'll work it out after release and we'll trust that the cloud providers can protect us. Well, I'll tell you one unfortunate secret there, that the cloud provider will not protect you. Not against volumetric attacks. Yes, to a certain extent, they will. But I can, for like 50 cents or €1, I can send 300, 400 gigabits per second of traffic your way via the black market using crypto. And what will the cloud provider do? They will shut off your instances. Yes, you can enable them maybe later, but initially they will shut off your instances. So you need to be prepared for that, talk with them in advance, get all the security in place, or work, sales pitch with a provider like us, which can deal with these kind of attacks and have this global network to ensure that they can handle it. So what do we generally see? Like this morning on the highway to Hilversum, I left at 7 a.m. from Rotterdam. That was a volumetric attack. There's traffic jams everywhere. I couldn't get through. There was no really general goal of these traffic jams, trying to disable something. No, they're just trying to fill up the road so nothing can be used. So that's a volumetric attack. And that's the one which is very cheap to generate, requires almost no skill, and is a very dangerous one very annoying one to deal with. It's also kind of where you often see blackmailing with companies that they try to disrupt you in this way. Similar with Overwatch, for example. Another one is focusing on the protocol. So in this case, this evil person would try to shoot my tire on my car, just try to overload my car so I can no longer drive. That's what you usually see if you have a web-based game. That's what I like to call, like, if people start doing SYN-based attacks on your public web-facing ports that have to be open. It's not a lot of traffic, it's a lot of requests, and it can severely disrupt and it can kill your game if you don't deal or think about this before you release it, how you're going to manage this. And the last one, and that's the most dangerous one, and I also have a few examples of this that I'll share, is when they target your application. So the car analogy, someone would actually try to shoot me, the driver in the car, to take me out. That's what these application-based attacks are doing. They will try to reverse engineer your server-side application, see if they can cause buffer overflow, see if they can get high privileges so they can take over the whole system. And usually the goal is to simply disrupt player experience. So a quick example there is, I'll go to the previous slide in a minute. There's a very known shooter taking place in Battlegrounds. And there was one of these application-based vulnerabilities. And it was with a game where the team already moved on to the new iterations, so it would have taken a lot of development time to fix. And what we were seeing, there were attackers simply going to the server browser, looking at the server with the most players, and hitting that one. And then the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one, until there was not a single player left playing this game. Now imagine if you're trying to, Imagine if you're trying to sell your DLC, sell your expansion packs, or your loot boxes. If that happens, you can forget it. In that region, you're dead. Research has also shown that if your player session gets disrupted once on a day, or 2 to 3 times a week at most people will still play the game. But if it happens multiple times in the evening, there's a very big chance that the player will go away, even if they have many sunk costs involved. They will move on to another game because it's simply not an enjoyable experience. And in this case, we had to reverse engineer, create a whitelist, blacklist-based system, for example, that all the players clicking join, they would be whitelisted in the game engine and on the network layer of all the infrastructure, and all the other bad traffic would be denied. That means the only people who would be able to try and disrupt the application would be the actual people playing inside of the game, and then we can detect it. Then it's no longer anonymous, and then you can enforce and deduct points, or saying you're no longer disqualified for your prize money, and so forth. Going quickly. The last point I want to bring to your attention is regarding worldwide coverage and latency. It's also something that it's simply my experience. It's usually an afterthought. But nowadays, when you want to have a successful live game, at least financially, you want to have as wide as a coverage across the world as you can possibly can. Up to a few years ago, we were trying to sell our capacity in Latin America. We were trying to sell our capacity in Africa. And many game publishers back then were like, anything beside Europe or US, we don't care. Well, that world is changing. And that's also something that you need to keep in mind. That, okay, I talked about cloud providers before. And when you start looking at where are all these cloud providers located, you will always also start noticing that you cannot really pick one to have full coverage around the world. There's ones which are more in Asia, there's one which are more in Europe or US, there's one more which might be Latin-based. So this is again another reason why you need to get multiple cloud providers or work with a platform which can help you with these kind of solutions. It's also very crucial that the connectivity from your players towards the game is in an optimal condition. That's latency. And that's when you're looking at these very, very large cloud provider networks, which also, for example, serve Netflix or all the big kind of bulky data, it's quite hard for them to have the same kind of interaction with you when there's a problem, to give you information about what's happening to your game, than if you're working with, I guess, let's say a smaller scale provider who is more dedicated towards gaming-based solutions. So, in the last 5 seconds, quick example. We heard about a football game in the Middle East. It was simple as following Reddit reports about users complaining, seeing very large latency numbers of countries which are, per definition, neighbors, but still looping through Frankfurt to Europe to play with each other. So for the game, for the player, it was a terrible experience. For most providers, most games would ignore this. But in this case, we put our little United Nations hat on of the Middle East and went in and tried to fix this. And this is where the value is for your players. Because since then, this was a few years ago, since then, Dubai, in this case for us, has become a very big hub, well known in the industry. If you want to serve the Middle East, you need to go there and need to do the same trick that we did. Others, we're not unique in that regard. Others watched and learned, which is also what I hope that you guys will do. There was a quick few advice points about what do you need to watch out for during gaming, what do you need to learn, and what do you need to keep in mind.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stefan from i3D.